Have been what it is. So welcome. It's been a couple months since we did a globalism book. Time to come back to the old haunts, the globalists, global elite. And if you didn't hear the show that we did with Tristan a couple weeks ago, be sure to go check that out. The Club of Rome eco worship stuff, because that's relevant to what we're going to talk about tonight. Same type of stuff. But at Jay's Analysis, we have a couple articles on this. And of course, the global elite eco worship stuff is crucial to the whole game plan. But we've not covered that a whole lot here. So I've gone a good ways now into this really boring book for you. So we're ready for Turning Point. And let's give a little bio. I meant to mention a little bio on Fritjof Capricorn here before we talk about and analyze his book. Frito-Lay Capricorn. It says he's an Austrian born. He must, that's what I was confused, because he sounds like Arnold, like I was saying. He sounds like Arnold with a little bit of helium.
Stogies, the Stogies, worship nature. Arnold with some helium. Put some helium in the Stogies. Smoke them with me.
So this is today's global planner that we want to look at. It says he's an Austrian-born deep ecologist who works in systems theory. And what was interesting was that as I'm reading the text, he immediately starts talking about Ghost in the Machine type stuff. He didn't mention. I was like, this guy sounds like Kessler. And then, boom, a few pages later, he mentions Arthur Kessler. So let's get his face off of here. So Turning Point is a 1982 book. This book is very similar in many ways to Marilyn Ferguson's book, The Aquarian Conspiracy, which is not a conspiracy book, but is in fact a pro-New Age Aquarian era globalism text, which we did a whole talk on. You can listen to that as well. So I would say this book is like Marilyn Ferguson's New Age book, and it's also like Kessler's Ghost in the Machine, which we covered and which I cited many times in Esoteric Hollywood. But this guy is the director of the Center for Ecoliteracy in Berkeley, California. And he's on the faculty of Schumacher College. So we have an academic class person here who is a theoretical physicist. He researches particle physics and systems theory from University of Vienna, University of Paris, Imperial College of London, etc., etc. And so what we get with this guy is the attempt to mold physics and theoretical physics into a palatable social engineering tool. I'm not joking. He is influenced by Gregory Bateson, the CIA MK Ultra luminary. This is one of the key figures. He quotes Bateson many times within the first few chapters. He is influenced by David Bohm, Stanislav Grof, Carl Jung, Thomas Kuhn of Scientific Revolutions, Structure of Scientific Revolutions fame with Paradigms. He is influenced by Ken Wilber, and he also proclaims himself a deep eco-feminist. Yes, a deep eco-feminist. Maybe that's why his voice sounds like a helium-tainted Arnold. He's got a little too much ecofeminism in his literal Arnold Schwarzenegger voice. He sounds like Arnold with helium.
The Stogies. You were saying now, what about your wife and the Stogies? We will smoke the Stogies from Mother Earth. We will turn Mother Earth into one giant green stogie.
If you didn't see the video that I shared of Arnold bragging about stogies, go check that out. So again, he has co-authored New Age nonsense with a Benedictine monk named David Steindl-Rast, which means that he doesn't believe anything near Christianity. Frito Capricorn is a member of the Earth Charter. Remember the Earth Charter? When we did the talk with Tristan, we covered the United Nations Earth Charter document. So again, if you didn't hear that talk with Tristan, the last one that he and I did really well. Everybody liked that one a lot. It had about 10,000 views. We got into the Club of Rome. We got into all this kind of stuff really deep. Maurice Strong. So what we have with Frito is another one of these characters. Now, we're going to see that not everything he says is wrong. There's some aspects of this approach that are correct. But remember, this is where topics like dialectics are so crucial, because some people bitch about the fact that I talk about dialectics a lot. I talk about it a lot because everybody from Plato to Hegel to people like this consistently talk about dialectics. And if you've not read Volume 1 of God, History, and Dialectic, you should, because you will see why dialectics is so important. And it will even relate to things like absolute divine simplicity, which you wouldn't think apply. But Frito wants us, like Huxley in the perennial philosophy, to merge back into the big blob one, the monad. So he is going to employ quite a few Far Eastern metaphysical concepts that he will tie to his theoretical physics, which I'm not saying is all false. I'm not necessarily saying that. However, as we covered in I think it was in the Marilyn Ferguson talk, some of this stuff to deal with theoretical physics is social engineering gobbledygook and has nothing to do with physics. It's literally social engineering. And that should not be surprising to those of us who are familiar with the types of philosophical critiques that I do of Darwinism. So if you want a key corrective to this, I recommend God, History, and Dialectic, Volume 1, which is available in paperback on Amazon. Everybody should read who's interested in these topics. Now, this is some pretty heavy theology here, but Farrell's God, History, and Dialectic, Volume 1 is a classic. And it will relate directly to the manipulation of dialectics as it pertains to social engineering, social sphere, and worldview perspective. You see, it's not just physics that we're talking about. The turning point that Capra is interested in is the turning point in science, society, and the rising culture. This is the subtitle of his book, and his other famous book is The Tao of Physics. In other words, Taoism, dialectics, dualism, and duality. These are the concepts that need to be correctives to Western thought. Quite literally, this is his whole project almost. So let's make sure that we keep this in mind. And a big part of this project is going to be selling this philosophy. Keep in mind, we will be taking super chats. I see we have a super chat there. Feel free to bring your questions. This may get a little philosophical. You might want to take some notes. We'll see. Let me put a picture up of this character here. Actually, I should have just put Low Pan up. Why am I putting this guy up? Nobody knows who this guy. Let's put Low Pan up.
Mr. Burton, you were not put upon this earth to figure it out, Mr. Burton.
So we're gonna be in Low Pan territory tonight. And by the way, Frito Capricorn is a deep eco-feminist. Frito Capricorn. So we're going to keep Low Pan in mind.
Mr. Burton, you were not put upon this earth to get it, Mr. Burton.
If you've not seen Big Trouble in Little China, you're missing out. All right, so Lopan's going to be with us here for this. Again, Super Chats are welcomed. If you want me to answer your questions, ask those in Super Chats. And be sure to like, subscribe, share below. Please counteract the increasing haters who are suffering from passive-aggressive envy. The many, many, many haters. Yes, deep ecology, unfortunately, will eventually mean goddess worship, even according to Mr. Fritjof. Now, he doesn't call it goddess worship. I'm 6'2", for those that are asking me. Yes. So let's get into this 1982. Now, who promotes this book? Carl Rogers. Interesting character, Carl Rogers. The LA Times and the Washington Post. CIA Washington Post. So this is a pro-CIA left type of book, Rockefeller Foundation type of book, you see. No, I'm not 5'10". What are you talking about? 6'2". Anyway. The I Ching is where he begins his book. All right, we're going to get, we got to have this mystical Eastern philosophy to counteract Western rationalism, you see. After a time of decay comes turning point. So what we're going to see is this alchemical reading of not just history, but the whole process of mankind. It's very Teilhardian, it's very Hegelian. And that's because he ties it into Far Eastern dialectical philosophy, of course. The powerful light has been banished and it returns. There is movement, but it is not brought about by force. The movement is natural, arising spontaneously. For this reason, the transformation of the old becomes easy. The old is discarded and the new is introduced. Both measures according with the time, and therefore no harm results. So we're going to have the absolutizing of natural forces. Natural forces here, we are speaking in natural forces after the fall. Okay, so we are not talking specifically about theological concepts as we analyze this book. He is talking about the processes that we see in nature. Day, night, death, decay. These are equal forces. Yin yang. Yin yang. It's that simple. And they're absolutized. One is not better than the other. Good and evil, night and day. It's gnosis. Far Eastern philosophy is really, at base, at root, no different than Far Eastern Gnosticism. Is no different than Eastern philosophy, Far Eastern philosophy. So he begins by talking about the crisis. We've seen this in many of these globalism writers, haven't we? I've highlighted this. They always begin the book by talking about the crisis of the modern world. We are in a state of perpetual crisis. Are we really? No. According to what the elite do, there's a lot of crises. But we're not perpetually in a state of crisis. This is part of the propaganda. It always begins this way. And what does he say? What does he start with? Worldwide crisis of environment. Are we in a worldwide crisis of environment? Well, perhaps, but who does he say is at fault? Nations. Nation states that have weapons. There's nothing wrong with my left eye. It's just that when I'm drinking coffee and I have this light in my eye, it's bright. Nations have stockpiled all the nukes and the SALT treaties, and the arms race has built up giant nukes, and this is going to destroy Mother Earth. Every one of the globalism writers begins by talking about the nuke crisis. And they don't just, this goes back to H.G. Wells, who dreamt up the bomb almighty anyway. Nukes, 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 nukes. Nuki, nuke, get some nuki. He says there's mass infant deaths, which, by the way, why does he have a problem with that? Because he goes on to talk about how we need to depopulate. So I'm not sure why he thinks that mass infant deaths are a bad thing when everybody needs to die. But he says that America is run by a military-industrial complex. Whoa, really? Well, yes, it is. So thank you for that true statement there, Mr. Fritjof. However, Mr. Fritjof is a servant and a promoter of all the same people that own and run the military-industrial complex. He promotes all the same plans. the people who run the military-industrial complex are fine with mass depopulation. The threat of nuclear catastrophe, he says, is because of American chauvinism. So all he is the next phase of the revolution, you see. Do we have problems in the chat? Or am I going to have to step in here and fuss? Are people trying to take over? What's the problem in the chat here? I'm going to have to eventually have some moderators. And by the way, I should mention, I am going to have channel memberships. So YouTube has finally granted me, I'm now in the elite club of channel memberships. So that will give you the ability to subscribe to Jay's analysis, not just through the website, which is fine. There's extra perks at the website if you just want to subscribe through the channel. In the next week, I will have the channel memberships turned on, and you'll get content there as well. And of course, you can also subscribe on Patreon. People in the chat are trying to get listeners. Whoa, $100. Thank you. Crazy. To be involved in an e-spat. Yeah, I'm not here. We're not going to do the Nick Owen drama. We're here to talk about the globalism book. So that's not, to my listeners, they're here for that. So that's what we're going to talk about, because we're doing the lectures on the globalism book series. So we don't do e-drama. And anytime I do e-drama, like when I respond to the people who try to start the e-drama, they get crushed and they get butthurt. So I'm not talking about Nick or Owen. I'm talking about the people who obsessively make the videos every day. When they actually do have the encounter that they're so eager for and they get crushed, they get butthurt and they're mad. So what's the point even of interacting with people who want to do the drama? I'm talking about the people with 1,000 and under subs that excessively make videos every day. It's not you that needs a moderator. I'm not talking about you. I'm talking about the trolls that come in the chat and try to take over the chat, because people do that. By the way, it's not just because of you guys. It's because there are bots that will come in the chat and that will post porn links all day, and somebody has to sit there and block all the porn bot links. Anyway, so enough of that stuff. Let's get back to Frito Capricorn. So Frito says that the key issue that man has to solve is ecology. Of course, we remember from the First Global Revolution, which is the book that the global elite put out. And it was put out in the 70s, First Global Revolution, which, well, it's a reprint of the book that came out earlier in the 70s called Limits to Growth, talking about how for the sake of Mother Earth, we're going to have austerity. We're going to have to shut everything down. You're going to have to go into banker austerity because you toot too much. Stop pooting everywhere. And also your cows too. And this is immediately where the book begins. We found, as the Club of Rome document says, the unifying matter to bring about global social change, which is the final revolution. Huxley, right, is what? Is ecology, is the green stuff. Global climate change. The global climate is how he begins the book. So ecology is the key linchpin of the whole control mechanism. At least that's what has been completely fostered by the elite. That's what they put all their money into, the Rockefellers and so forth, covered in David Rockefeller's memoir. So he brags about this. Collier and Horowitz's book, Rockefeller's American Dynasty, the authorized biography. Those are two that we will cover in the future. So what we understand from that is that global climate change is not a thing that they discovered was the problem. The thing that they created to be the problem. The thing that they chose to be the unifying problem of mankind in order to socially engineer. He goes on to say, well, and this is because pollution, because of too many people, is going to lead to epidemics. We're going to have epidemics, mass biowarfare epidemics. The third world is overpopulated. The first world is overpopulated. And this has led to an energy crisis. Now, this is right after the time of the 70s energy crisis that was engineered by Bilderberg. Read the book by William F. Engdahl, which explains how Bilderberg engineered the gas energy crisis of the 70s. The energy crisis is ultimately, he says, a war on resources. So with all of these people, what do they say? Mankind is all fighting for resources. There's not enough, and therefore that's why wars happen, because of not enough resources. If we could control resources and population, we would no longer have war. That's literally the low IQ argumentation of the global elite. Well, they know that that's not actually true, but that's what they tell all the dum-dums in academia and in the masses, right? And he goes on to say, change is what we need. It's all about change. Cancer, crime, pollution, it's all a result of ecology and the environment, because what do we all share in common? Whether you're a Buddhist, whether you are a Christian, or whatever the religions are, everybody shares the environment in common. And so that's why they chose the environment as the unifying social engineering world government linchpin. And they admit that in the white paper from the Club of Rome, First Global Revolution, which is another aspect of the final revolution, you see. He says, NGOs, brain trusts, think tanks are all busy bees working on this. Oh, yes, we can really trust those people. And then he goes on to talk about people like Irving Kristol and Henry Luce. Henry Luce, Skull and Bones, CIA, Time Magazine. Oh, yes, great men. Great men. All right. Then he goes on to talk about Vietnam and Watergate. And these scandals have caused people no longer to put their trust in publicly elected officials. Now, again, a lot of what he's going to say sounds plausible. Hey, yeah, military-industrial complex has a tremendous amount of power in America. So I guess he means well. No, he doesn't mean well, you see. When he talks about crisis and change, he doesn't mention the fact that the establishment wants there to be controlled chaos, controlled crisis, controlled change. And that a lot of this crisis and change is manufactured. That's what he never touches on. And so what does he begin with? The problem also in the Western world that no one has figured out is men. The patriarchy, you see. We have overlooked the fact that it's not just the environment, it's toxic masculinity and the patriarchy that's the problem of the West, according to Fritjof Capricorn. He says, so what I've done is I've decided that we need to, he says, yin and yang get out of balance in history. And there's just this back and forth, yin and yang, booby left, booby right, between history, right? Left booby is higher, the right booby is higher. This dialectical booby process leads us to the hermaphrodite, quite literally. The boobies merge, the left and right boobies merge into the hermaphrodite Baphomet character throughout the dialectical process of history. Now, I'm halfway joking, but I'm halfway serious, because he literally says that we've swung too far to the left brain side of things with logic and reason and mathematics. We got to balance that out with feminism. Therefore, it's time to promote goddess worship, feminism, and to destroy the patriarchy, because this will bring balance to the force. Literal Yoda level stuff.
Yes, you must bring balance to the force. You must be cocked. Luke, you must be cocked.
Maybe that's why Star Wars was cooked.
May the cock be with you. You don't need to see our patriarchy. You don't need to see our phallus. You need to be more cocked.
That was my Obi-Wan. Then he launches into his proof for this on the basis of large-scale civilizational patterns echoing somebody like Spengler. Now, he mentions Toynbee. Of course, Spengler is far superior to Toynbee, but I wouldn't expect somebody of the IQ level of Capra to appreciate Spengler. It's too high-minded for him. So he goes with the more normie Royal Society clown Arnold Toynbee and the studies of history, where we see dynamic patterns of history of the Sumero-Akkadian, the Egyptian, the Aegean, the Syrian, the Hellenic, the Islamic, the Orthodox, and the Western civilizations coming and going in their patterns and cycles. And it, again, it has the rise and fall, or the birth, peak, death cycle that we know from Oswald Spengler and Decline of the West. So he models this pattern motif from ancient historians, he says. And this is something that we've also seen in many of the globalism writers, right? We saw this with, of course, H.G. Wells has outlines of history, which we haven't done yet, but he does the same thing. Spengler I would not class as a globalism writer. He is not. He is looking at large-scale patterns in history, but that does not mean he is favorable to globalism. However, we did see this in Jacques Attali. Jacques Attali took us through the propaganda trail of tears through history. Right. So this is what all these globalism writers do. It's almost like they're all writing the same books. Is there an AI that just writes all these same books? They come out with the crisis. They talk about how man's the problem. And then they go through the history of civilizations and talk about evolution. They all do the same thing. If we live in an era of free thought and rational inquiry and discourse, then why does every so-called academic write the same shit? Why do they not diverge from one another? You're allowed a little bit of area of divergence, but nothing significant. So he starts talking about yin and yang and how world cultures, again, are a dialectical pendulum swinging back and forth between left and right, liberal and conservative. And then he mentions some characters that he finds convincing and important. Saint Simon, who was an Illuminist, Herbert Spencer, the Darwinian, and Hegel. Hegel, the dialectical German idealist, goofball philosopher. There was an idiot on YouTube saying that I secretly am a German idealist. I have multiple critiques of German idealism. It's another manifestation of the monad and absolute divine simplicity. There's nothing to do with German idealism in the philosophy that I advocate. St. Gregory Palamas is not a German idealist. But we have seen pretty consistent patterns in characters like Herbert Spencer, Saint Simon, and Hegel, who we have covered in the past in at least 2 or 3 talks. So the cultural patterns, he says, show us that everything is evolving. All is in flux. Heraclitus. And I think he mentions Heraclitus. All is in flux. Yes, he did. Heraclitus. All is in flux. And so we see the left global elite types. They love the principles of everything in flux and chaos, disorder. When we look at the so-called right wing, they just believe everything should be manufactured. In other words, this guy would present himself as anti-neocon, but he's really just as revolutionary as the neocons. The neocons all serve the same ideas of ecology and all this stuff because they have the same masters ultimately. But he says everything is evolving, and therefore it's part of the process of evolution. Have you noticed that evolution basically vindicates and, quote, proves anything and everything? He says he's basically arguing that evolution proves that feminism is determined to win. There's nothing about evolution that proves that feminism is going to take over or balance out Western patriarchy. Excuse me, are we supposed to literally believe that in Far Eastern civilizations there's not patriarchy? Really? Give me a freaking break. What idiot literally believes that? This is social engineering propaganda for the West, you see. And he anticipates a lot of the SJW stuff on page 29 when he says that it's time to change the language and the way that we talk and interact with women because women aren't scientists and they're not wearing the lab coats and making decisions because men have kept them down. Yeah, sure. That's the only reason women aren't scientists and aren't inventors. That's the only reason. He says, so what we need is a paradigm shift. a similar paradigm shift to what we saw in Egyptian and Hellenic civilizations and their rise and fall. Now it's time for a new paradigm shift because he says of fossil fuels. Dinosaur juice.